What's up, Nick? How you doing?
Good, Joe. How are you?
Good, good, man. Good, good. So, yeah, thanks for we had to reschedule the podcast, and it was interesting. I think we were going to talk about running a company, but I don't know. Some things happened recently in your world, so I guess we can talk about that too. But before we get into things, I guess you better give a quick intro for the audience. So, for the people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So anyone who hasn't met me or isn't aware of who I am, I'm Nick. I'm the founder and CEO of Workstream IO. We're a workflow company in the data space. We played with a lot of different iterations and pivots of our product over the last 4 years. I'm happy to talk about any of that. But what Joe is referencing is, and we were just talking about it before we hopped on the recording, is unfortunately we've decided to shut the company down in the last few weeks, and so yeah, it's I'm in the middle of it right now. So not fun stuff by any means, but kind of is what it is. It's a rough market out there. But yeah, I was the founder and CEO. I've been the founder and CEO of Workstream for about 4 years, and then previous to that, I have a career really into some tech. But I started my career as an analyst at Tesla way back in the day. I was there for about 4 years, pre-delivery on the Roadster through the IPO. And then I ran operations at a software company here in New York. And kind of my experiences there were what inspired me building Workstream and the Workstream journey. And unfortunately, we're kind of at a spot, which is where a lot of startups end up, which is kind of things don't work out and you got to shut it down. So yeah, that's me. Joe, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, anytime, anytime. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear the news. I mean, it doesn't make it any better that you say there's more, other companies going through it. It's just, you work your ass off on something and it doesn't work out. I can't imagine it feels good. But before we start hit record, it's kind of like I also mentioned, and I think we agree, this is it's a rare opportunity to talk to somebody who's going through sort of the opposite of what you expect in the startup, right? Most people expect the startup to kill it and become a unicorn and stuff and succeed beyond anyone's wildest dreams. But this is reality a lot of startups face, and you're going through it right now. I mean, walk me through what's going through your head right now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously shutting your company down and like your baby that you worked on for 4 years, it's shitty, right? I mean, there's like ego hits that come with it. I mean, just the process of getting there is super stressful. Like getting to that shutdown decision, because as a founder, at least for me as a founder, like I'm not someone who gives up easily. Like I fight, right? And we had like three major pivots, the last of which was into this PagerDuty for data concept. That was originally one of the things that I was going to position the company as, right? Like when I was going to jump on the show. And that was like the last thing that we were going to market with and pushing with really hard here over the last 6 months. So you're like hammering all day long every day, trying to get traction and show enough, because in the back of your head, like if you don't do this, like you're dead.
Yeah.
So the emotions of going from like that to, wow, that actually was the most exciting thing that we did, but it was like, unfortunately, just too little too late, right? So going from 150 miles an hour towards that to you're just close enough to there, but you can't get you can't get everyone across the finish line around conviction, and then having to change course to like shut down. It's an emotional roller coaster, I mean, it was, when we like laid our team off, that was like awful. I was like crying on the call with people.
Yeah.
Because it's like these people have done nothing other than work their ass off for you. And they like believed enough in me as a founder and the vision of the company to like bet part of their career on it. And you're telling them that like they're no longer going to have a job, right? So I don't know, the emotions. I think just the emotional roller coaster of everything is like the hardest thing, and probably gives you the most cognitive dissonance about the experience. So I'm obviously still processing a lot of it, right?
Sure.
Anyways,
Yeah,
yes,
it's a lot to
answer
go
to the
through.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot to go through. I've had to lay off people, my own companies too, and it sucks, dude.
Yeah. I mean, as a leader, firing anyone sucks. Layoff sucks. I mean, like when I joined Tesla way back in the day, this was like 15 years ago, and I was
it's a long time ago,
a
actually.
long time ago, right? I mean, we were pre-delivery on the original Roadster. There was 200 people at the company, when I was at Tesla. So like
Dang.
there was 300 people at the company the first week I started, and at the end of the first week there was 200 people at the company. Like
Oh boy.
this was like right when Tesla was about to go out of business, right? And so, I mean, I saw those were probably like those really dark Tesla times were like my most acute exposure to like layoffs. But it just feels so different when you're an analyst supporting the executive team doing that to being the person that is doing it. There's probably like another level of emotions when, of course, like you're laying everyone off, you're shutting the whole thing down. And I'm sure there's some like leaders who don't care that much about people. I know, like at a big scaled company, right? People become like the cog in the machine. Like if Jamie Dimon lays off like 5,000 people, like does he care about the people? Like he probably does care about the people, but he doesn't see them or know them. Like when you know the people really well, that's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, I think it's what Stalin said once, where I think a single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic, something like that.
Are you quoting
Paraphrasing
Stalin
it, but
right now?
I just did, yeah. Well, his quote's I think pretty apt when you're talking about like mass casualties. You just
Yeah.
you don't even notice after a bit. I mean, he wasn't the greatest guy on the planet by any stretch of the imagination, but it was just that quote always stuck with me. And when you think about mass layoffs, you're talking like tens of thousands of people. That's a lot of people. But even a startup though, it also sucks, right? Because it's even worse because all these people, and they're people that joined you early on. You're not a big company. Even Tesla, when he joined, didn't sound like it was a big company. You probably got to know everybody there, but like thousands of people, like you don't know anybody there. Your team, but so startups even crappier, just because it's like everybody. They took a bet on you and didn't work out. I mean, I had that happen. I had to let go of my team. That sucked.
Yeah.
There's nothing. Yeah. There's no way around it.
Yeah, I mean, like
so.
There's like the startup family phase, or if you, I think it's like blitz scaling, and he like talks about the size of the team, and the first size of the team is like the family, and we were like, if we had raised more and gone on to growth, you grow out of it, but we were still in that mode. I mean, I don't personally really buy that much the analogy that like a startup is a family. I think it's much more like a sports team, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But you still bleed with the people in the dugout, and you care a lot about them.
Oh, yeah.
So we were there. So yeah, it's shitty. That's the hardest part, for sure.
It is. Well, especially in this market too, because it's like people are going out, and including yourself, you're going into sort of the big unknown at this point. It's not like the good old days of even the 2010s where tech roles were easier to find. It's like the tech world right now is pretty bad. So
yeah. I mean, I'm like trying to help people. I mean, we have great talent. If you're listening to this and you're a founder and you're looking for great engineering, design, QA talent, folks on the go-to-market side, email me. I'm Nick@Workstream.io. We have great folks that are like looking for jobs. Awesome. They're like awesome. So I'm like, this is what I'm actually spending a bunch of my time doing, trying to help.
That's really good of you.
Source like their opportunities.
It's awesome. Yeah, I did the same thing with my team too. I just gave them over to a friend of mine. I said, you can have them. So that was thankfully easier than a different job market. But yeah, that's really good of you to do that. Like, I don't think a lot of CEOs or managers or leaders would even take the time to do that, because it's So,
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know, it's interesting. I mean, the answer is thank you for saying that, but like the answer is like, of course I'm doing that, right? I mean, I was so we played like during the course of trying to build the company, we of course like played with our own podcast and content, and there was a phase of our content where I did a lot of interviewing of like data leaders and then like data driven operations folks because there was like a version of our product that was kind of like the intersection of data and the rest of the business. So I interviewed this guy who's actually a good friend of mine, Eddie Centillion, who ran the customer experience organization at Gusto for a long period of time. Anyways, this is a long way of saying that one of the things he said on our show was, leadership is ultimately about serving other people,
mhm.
and that just like really has stuck with me as a way to think about like what your role is as any type of leader or like a founder. Like if it's really about you and your ego and that people serve you, well, like it's probably the worst way to be. It's really about serving other people. And so like when it came to the shutdown, honestly, like of course it's shitty for me and it sucks. Like we thought we were building something. Like you believe that you're building something amazing, but you kind of turn around and you're like, you feel like you're failing all of these people that you're supposed to serve, right? Like you're failing your employees, they're your customers in some way. I mean, they're buying into an early stage vendor. So I'm like, am I screwing these people? And then of course you're losing investors' money. That doesn't feel good. Now, the investor piece is really interesting because like I was so stressed out about like letting everyone know that it's like effectively a wipeout, right? There's some like M&A stuff maybe that could still happen, right? But it's not like a good result. Anyways, most of my investors, when I like let them know and I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, especially to like my main investors, their response is like, are you okay? Like, no need to apologize for us. This is like the way the game goes, right? Like
Mhm.
so many early stage startups fail. It's kind of like the cost of doing business. That was interesting. I mean, that was a nice set of moments there, right? But
Mhm.
that was interesting. I was super stressed about that one. Like those three groups of stakeholders, like every communication, really really was not a lot of fun and drove a lot of anxiety.
I'm sure. What were the early indications that things weren't going to work out with Workstream?
Yeah, so that's a long and sordid story, but um, I mean, it depends on like how far you like rewind, right? I mean, the
Mm,
whole thing about startups and software companies now, it's like fail fast and fail early and fail often, right? So it's like just because things aren't working doesn't necessarily mean that you think you're going to fail, right? And there's like many versions of our product that didn't necessarily work. Anyways, not to give you the whole like the whole thing, right? But before, let's say our final pivot, which was this like PagerDuty for data concept, and the we were going to market for this long time with this product that we called data knowledge, and we were trying to like do something different than the data catalog vendors because one, that's not really wasn't consistent with our vision. Two, I'm not like the founder to build another data catalog, and it's also just like it's just a pretty crowded space.
you think?
Yeah, um, but it was more like well, by data knowledge, it was think of it as like a help center for the data team, like a help
Hmm.
center Zendesk type of product that they could use to like enable end users, manage the like service desk workflow. Um, so we spent a bunch of time, in private beta there. We got good feedback from private beta customers. We launched out of private beta. We were able to convert a lot of those private beta customers to like real accounts. This was really before the tech shutdown. So we, it was summer of, and I, so we're in, it was really summer of 22 that
Interesting.
we kind of were launching out of this private beta. We launched out of private beta, announced it, and then in like the months after that, I converted a bunch of our like private beta customers to like legit accounts, like between 10 and 30K a year.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was amazing. And we pretty quickly we started monetizing. We signed our first contracts. We kind of launched out of private beta late summer. We signed our first contracts like beginning of December. And then very quickly we went from like no revenue to like 100K in revenue with this. And so you're like, okay, well, the N here is small with a number of customers, but these are like big, meaty dollars.
Mhm.
Um, we should be able, like, we just got to 100K in ARR. Like, can we, like, why shouldn't we believe we can go sign up, you know, another 50 customers and get to 100, sorry, to $1 million in ARR, which is really where you need to go. And so, you know, the journey from like of those next 6 months, things kind of got dark pretty quickly. Like, and it was weird because we got all this false signal. So like we got to 100K in ARR. We're like in Q2 now. We're in like Q2 of 23. And then we created all this pipeline. So we had these like amazing pipeline creation months in like May, June, and July. So you're like, okay, like we just created tons of pipeline. We just now need to like move these pilots and get them moving. And it's like all of a sudden we couldn't move any of the pilots and we couldn't create any more pipeline.
Mm.
And you're kind of like,
Interesting.
what has changed, right? Or like, did we just find the needles in the haystack with the private beta? But you kind of got into October and you hadn't moved any of the pilots and you hadn't created a lot more pipelines. So you're like, shit, right? Like I had ramped the team and it's not like our burn, we had 11 people on the team, right? So it's not like our burn was insane, right? I hadn't raised $50 million of capital, any of those things, but like those decisions make a big difference on your runway and all of that. So you're looking at this and you're like, there's no way we're going to get to $1 million in ARR, you know, to do like a legit Series A, which in today's market is somewhere between, let's say, $8 and $20 million, right? Even in today's market, but like, so you're seeing that, and then simultaneously, the market for fundraising is like way dried up. My investors are like, there are no Series A's being done. The benchmark is less 1 million. It's more like $3 million, independent of any other like good metrics on like a Series A. And so, you know, at this point, let's say it's October, beginning of October, I'm like, what are we going to do, right? Like we're looking at death here. And so there was this version of there's this feature set in our product that folks started asking us to like evolve more and really develop. And at the highest level, it was this, we built within this data knowledge help center concept, we built a status page, right? Like, so think of like the Atlassian status page feature, and you can now plug into DBT or your data pipelines and show on like a dashboard or a data product that like, is this thing up and down? What's the percentage uptime, percentage downtime, right? Is there a current incident being tracked? If there's an incident, we'll alert you, stuff like that. So folks kept being like, wow, this is like super cool. This is actually really relevant to our data engineering team. Can you kind of build this whole workflow around it? And so it was like, this is really interesting. So we went back to a lot of those customers to try to understand more what they were looking for, what their workflow was around it. And it was like, hey, some of them use something like a PagerDuty to handle incident management, but it doesn't give them any good metadata. They really want to be alerted in Slack. There was all of these kind of unmet needs that they had. So we're like, okay, well, this probably is our best bet for saving this thing. So we kind of made this call to pivot in that direction. And at first, it was a pivot in that direction with the intention for it was a product pivot. So it's like, okay, let's pivot in this direction. We need to like deepen this DBT integration, and we have like we have a Monte Carlo integration, and so it's like let's deepen these integrations. Let's set up an ability for you to kind of build custom integrations if you want to alert like on a custom data pipeline or something that we don't support. By the way, if I'm just rambling on, please interrupt me.
Oh no, 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 man. This
Um,
is
um, so we're like, okay, there's a bunch of product work here. Let's sprint at this as quickly as possible, and then November-ish, let's start trying to actually sell this thing. And there was a lot of product work that needed to be done, but let's say it's really like we first started trying to sell it at the end of last year. It was really sellable in January, but we're still not selling. So we're now getting folks on the phone. Folks are like, these are real needs that we have, but we're not considering any new software. And like, in the back of your head that there's like layoffs across tech. These folks that we're selling into generally over-index on tech companies. And like, and probably every listener of the show knows like how much layoffs have impacted data teams and like where the state of data budgets are. So it's like not surprising that people are like, this is really cool. Yes, we have unmet needs here, but we're not buying anything.
right.
So you're like, this is February 1st. Like I'm out of like we're recording this the end of May. Like I'm out of cash
Yeah.
literally right now. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm
Shit.
looking at this at the end of January. I'm like, well, what do we do? Right? Like, do we just shut it down now? Is there anything we can hope for? And what had happened through all of these conversations with customers is there were some folks that said, we can't buy anything right now, but we're happy to beta test this for you.
Hmm.
So as a founder who's been at it for effectively 4 years at that point, I'm like, am I really going all the way back to effectively recruiting private beta customers?
Right.
That like really sucks. You're like, oh, like this really then is like maybe this is like kind of a restart, but is our best bet. And look, I've never been a hardcore data engineer, but like the reality is through all of these pivots, that was now we were selling into. And if there was one like superpower that I had, it was I'm just like a really good listener. And I was just really good at like listening to our users. And anyways, so I used that superpower to listen to kind of build this alerting product for data incidents in DBT and beyond that would alert people in like Slack, right? And then there was a whole workflow that we could facilitate in our web app that we could build around. But anyways, you kind of just intuitively knew that with this user, really what folks want is like data engineers don't want to be sold to. They have a problem. They want to go install something and use something like. And if eventually like they're really adopting it, like an engineer will probably buy something, right? But there's no way that a sales motion into cold calling data engineers is ever going to work. So you're like, okay, well, like we got nothing to lose. Let's just give it away for free, and let's just turn around and try to get as many free folks as possible. So that's what we did. And when we first met, that was what I was running at 150 miles an hour at, and it was working. Like we onboarded more clients between February 1st and the end of April than we had in like the history of the company,
Wow.
which was amazing. So it was working, but like the reality was we were 4 years into it. We had raised a lot of capital. We had no cash. So it was just a very different spot than we would have, for example, had been in 2.5 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of moments where you were like, okay, it's clear what we're doing isn't going to work, right? But I was hustling until really the end of April trying to make it work, with, of course, an increasing understanding that like with every passing day, the probability is increasing, by a couple percentage points easily towards shutdown. And of course, that's where we ended up, unfortunately.
Did you try and look for any buyers
You know,
for your
I
company?
did. You know, the natural buyers would be the folks that you've built integrations with.
Yeah.
And we built integrations with a ton of BI tools. You know, we built some of these other integrations that I referenced already. Um, but it's an interesting market, right? Like again, anyways, so with the like data incident management product, I tried. There weren't necessarily takers there. On the data knowledge product, I tried.
Yeah.
But again, it was like this kind of triple whammy. The like slowdown in tech made it harder to sell to people, right?
Hmm.
Tactically. Um, so unless, and this I think this is probably still the case. Disagree with me if you think this is wrong, but I think if you're not a top, you know, top, quartile or quintile priority for a data team, like you're most likely like out of the budget, right? Unless you're like a must have, must need. Like the products that are nice to haves are not ones that are being bought or renewed right now,
Hmm.
which is probably right in general, but like that's a radically different world than the world we were in 2 years ago. So like
Way different.
way different, right? So like if you're not a must have, you're dead from a sales perspective. Investors are demanding that because all the investors are skittish, so investors are demanding that you show more, right? So
Hmm.
a red hot fire deal 3 years ago that was raising a $30 million Series A at 500K in ARR, which I'm not
Which is
lying, which
insane.
is what
Yeah, I
happened.
saw it happen.
Yeah, it
Yeah, it was
happened,
nuts.
right? Now, if you have like $2 million in ARR, people are like, I don't know if that's enough because all those
Hmm.
investors have like lost their shirt on all those other deals. So the point is that like, is that all wrong? I don't know if it's necessarily wrong. It's probably more right for the ecosystem in general, but like even a startup, there's only so much you can jerk the wheel and change things, right?
Hmm.
And if you've raised capital and you've built a team and you have runway around a certain set of assumptions, and the underlying conditions radically change so much, there's only so much that you can do. Of course, that's a self-serving comment, right? So, anyways, the investor expectations changed. And then, anyways, all those same
Yeah.
dynamics also are putting pressure on anyone who, for us, that might be an M&A opportunity, right? Because all of those companies at scale are laying folks off and being told that they need to be super, super prudent with capital, et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera. And we're a seed stage company that has some cool stuff, but is some version of an acqui-hire. And so it just,
Yeah.
I know other folks that were like in a similar spot that us that, announced M&A by Stripe as an example, right? Which is more of is it just like a true, or M&A by, whatever big tech company that's not
Yeah.
necessarily relevant to what you do, which is just like a pure on acqui-hire. I think in order for me to have gotten that done, I would have had to spend my last 6 months of the company really focused on that as opposed to trying to save it. And I kind of knew that. For better for worse, I wasn't ready to give up.
Hmm. Your comment about the must-haves for a data team is an interesting one too, because I feel like that's changed a lot in the past few years. Where I think the must-haves were, let me see, if you look at kind of the modern data stack team, which
Yeah.
I kind of question whether that's data engineering or not, but we'll for argument's sake we'll call it because that's I think archetypal of a lot of data teams. So it's probably Snowflake, probably DBT,
Yeah.
Fivetran Looker.
It
Right
was
now
Looker.
it was Looker. Now it's like I don't even know what it is. It was Mo, and it was Hex. Now it's Power BI is what I'm seeing the most of. To be frank, it's the interesting one. But what I keep seeing is that the must haves keep changing too, right? Like I'm seeing kind of everyone's second guessing Snowflake now.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to pick on any vendors, but this is just what I'm hearing. Same with Fivetrans, same with a lot of the others. So it's like the things that were hot now it's sort of the yin to the yang. Now everyone's looking for other options, right?
Yeah.
So open table formats kind of making some vogue. Uh, Azure, is sort of everyone's taking a look at that now because I think Azure, you can bundle a lot of Office with Azure, and Microsoft's incredibly good at selling to companies. They've been doing it for decades. So it's like, so the must-haves I feel like are also changing, right? I mean, DBT's changes, and love those guys to death, but the cloud's definitely, at least from what I've been hearing, it's a difficult sell to some teams because they don't have any money left. These data teams are strapped. Like a lot of data teams got cut, and the money they have left, I mean, what do you have to spend on?
Yeah, I mean, the dynamics even of the must-haves, I think to your point, is super interesting. I mean, to me, it's like you have to be a must-have. Like if the product isn't a must-have and you're considering joining a company and it's not a must-have, don't join it because it's probably not going to be there.
Yeah.
If you're thinking of starting something, like the bar should be really high, like it needs to be a must-have. I mean, I think this is a data and anything else, right?
Yeah. Sure.
Now, again, I think the must-haves changed also based off of the underlying conditions, right? Like if every company in the world is growing, let's say on average, every tech company is growing on average between 30 or somewhere between 30 and 100% year over year, right? That means the needs and the problems that company are experiencing are radically different than ones in which layoffs are happening, right? So that impacted us a lot, right?
Sure.
We had a whole set of assumptions that were like, well, in a growth world, right, you're going to need a help center to train people, right, and to support them.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't the world that we ended up in. I think to your point about the must-haves, it's interesting, right? And this goes so much to like, is it better to be the first mover or not? And Microsoft, to your point, you brought up Microsoft. They're the like perfect example of the company that has made its bones for 50 years now and not being the first mover. They just copy everything. And they're just amazing selling into the enterprise. And I mean, Azure is a great example of that. I think Power BI is a great example of that. And look, I think they're smart and they realize that, like, I mean, there's a lot of things, but like data teams, like I say this with love, but like data folks and data engineers, like generally are pretty fickle with regards to their tools. Part of what makes the space cool and dynamic and fun is that like folks are interested in new things and adopting new tools and new ways of working. And it's like, oh, it's all radically changing. But that also makes it really hard to build a business, right? And it's like there's another element to the personality of data people, again, because data folks really are, I mean, a lot of folks really are engineers. I mean, they're analysts too, right? But like, we all know, like, this is all blending and changing, right? So there's a lot of folks that really are engineers. Maybe they're a software engineer, they're a data engineer, or they believe they're a data, they're an engineer through and through, which is right. Like those folks, they don't want to be sold, like they don't want to be sold to, but they're like interested in trying things, right?
Yeah.
So they want to try new tools, but they're like, well, I don't want to buy something, and like if I'm going to buy something, I don't want to be sold to about it. So like it's very tricky. It's a very tricky space to navigate, which is just the reality of it. But anyways, even within the must-haves, I think it's like you have something hot, and it could not be hot 6 months later or 12 months later, right? So like, what's your sustainable moat and advantage? It's like a good question.
It's ever shifting. Yeah. It feels like, I mean, what do you think are the must-haves these days?
For a data team or,
Yeah.
I mean,
let me ask you actually two questions. What were the must-haves? Maybe back in the good old days, say early 2020s, and what do you think the must-haves are now?
I mean, it feels like there's like fewer must-haves. Like, let's say in like the early 2020s at the highest level, like what is it? Andreessen Horowitz has that like ridiculous map about like the modern data stack. You know I assume you know what I'm talking about, that one. Right?
Yeah.
So like, how many categories in that are must-haves, right? So like an interesting one would be like, is data and I'm going to go by category. I'm not necessarily going to go by vendor. So like, is data observability a must-have? Well, or like, is a data catalog a must-have, right? Well, if you like looked at that market map, and what I think a lot of teams were telling you is that these like meta products would be must-haves. But are they? I don't know, right? There's a lot of folks that I've spoken with who are like, we don't get it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's kind of big. Like, anyways, I guess if you 2020 as an example, it feels like the must-haves were it was, Snowflake, Segment, DBT was clearly a thing. It was probably Looker or your BI tool.
Yeah.
And then there was all of these like new sexy products that were coming to market, right? It's like, well, you don't just need a BI tool. You also want like notebooks. Because like BI is really good for like reporting and dashboarding, but then notebooks, that's for like exploratory analysis. And we want to be using notebooks. We don't want to be using Google Sheets and Excel for that because, no one wants to be an Excel monkey, right? And then, data, what we were building really are products, right? So like data is a product, right? Like you should be running your data team like a product team or an engineering team or whatever, right? We need quality. Okay, cool. So like we need to invest in like data observability. But there's also like, I think Monte Carlo is actually doing pretty well, but like, I think there's a lot of other vendors in that space that like are not. But there's like, if you just think of DBT, like there's a lot of testing that you can do just like natively there within like DBT, right? So
it's a great product too for what it does. It's terrific, right?
Yeah,
and you get a lot. I always felt like DBT's biggest competitor was itself, and I think it's kind of blindingly obvious. Their core product's really, really good.
Yeah,
you can do a lot with it. So
that's their challenge. Their challenge is just monetizing like the open source version, right? And I think a good question there is like, is DBT Cloud a must-have? I think I don't know. I think the answer is probably not. That's their challenge. The number of teams that I spoke with, when we did this whole data PagerDuty for data thing, like one of the things we had to do was build a DBT core integration, which I'd been holding off on for a long time because it's a lot more complicated to do that. It's quite frankly was a pain in the butt to do, but like half of our clients that were adopting this thing were like DBT core, not cloud. And I was talking to folks that were churning off of cloud onto core. And why? Because cloud was expensive and it was nice that they hosted it for you, right? And there was stuff like the APIs, right? But why pay DBT all of that money? Again, because data engineers are happy. The data team is happy to host it themselves. And they're being told by their CFO that they got to like slash costs and they can't spend money on anything, right? And so if you see, what's the barometer there? If 30% of teams are churning, like, is that the number where you're no longer a must have? I don't know.
That's a good question.
I'm the CEO that has shut his company down. So, I can't say that others are in a worse scenario than me, but like, that's a dynamic. That's a challenge, I think.
It's a big challenge. What always, I made the decision to stay out of the startup game, and Lord knows I had enough ideas back in the through the 2010s and the early 2020s. When I saw a lot of my friends starting data tooling startups, I'm like, what? Am I the idiot here? Like, why am I not doing this? Then I was like, I don't know. It felt it was crowded too. It felt like there was a lot of entrance into the space, and I think the peak of it was, I was listening to a panel with a big VC who I won't name, and this VC said, well, I don't think this ever ends. I think this was 2021, the summer of 2021, which I think was the tippy top of it, right?
Yeah.
Like this doesn't stop. And in the back of my head, I'm like, I'm old enough to know, and I've been through several downturns. I know when people start talking like this that things are going to be changing soon.
Yeah.
That's just always how it goes.
Yeah. I've been through, like, I started my career in the financial crisis downturn, right? Like at Tesla when we were almost going out of business. So like, I wasn't assuming that it was gonna. I wasn't assuming that it was gonna last forever. I mean, we still ended
Right.
up where we ended up, right? But you
Yeah.
just know that like that is insane and it's crazy. I think the if you're starting a company, so many folks today, and this is a good thing for like me to think about and meditate on, right? Like,
Mm,
there's a lot of ways to start a business.
a lot of
A lot
ways.
of ways. Now, capital has been cheap, so like the lowest personal risk way to do it is to like go take all the for a long time has been 10, 15 years is to like go accept investor money that VCs are increasingly jamming down everyone's throat, right?
Hmm.
I mean, even today, the the typical seed round, even in this market, like seeds haven't slowed down. Like
Mm.
the typical seed is like $3 to $5 million. That's crazy. Like if you look at where we were 10 years ago, right? There's a lot of capital that goes into these companies before Series A, before product market fit, so to speak. Anyways, the point is that like
Hmm.
if you're thinking of starting something, you're like, oh, I want to go build a product company. The lowest personal risk way is like, okay, let's go raise capital. I can pay myself something, but it puts all of these pressures and expectations on you, and the
Hmm.
clock is ticking as soon as you start to do that. You could book bootstrap, like a product company. Like Kabula has done this very effectively in the data space for I
Hmm.
don't know how long, 15 years, but they had to take a lot of personal risk to go do that. I mean, it's very impressive what they've done, but I think they all, I don't want to speak for them, but like they not only put in sweat equity there, but they probably put in like equity there as well, right? So that
Hmm.
ups a lot of the timeline required, the personal stakes, but there's something to that because you control your own destiny.
Well, yeah,
Um,
especially in Europe where they started. Like that's a
yeah,
different business climate in general. Like failing is a red mark on you. You don't have an option once you start. You have to succeed. Like if
totally,
you fail in a lot of those countries, like you're dog meat. Nobody wants to talk to you ever again.
totally.
Like, and also raising money there. What are you gonna do? Get money from like a family fund, which is what you're gonna do. Then there's these old memes on Instagram I see once in a while. It's like raise money from the European venture fund. Like we want 51%, and we want to meet with you every week to go over your numbers for a
Yeah.
yeah $100,000
Yeah.
investment or
I
something.
mean, there are more
So
VC funds now that are investing in Europe. A lot of it, I
oh
think,
yeah, it's
actually
taken off.
happens out of the UK. There's less
Hmm.
like, but culturally, for example, in Germany, right? I don't think the Kapula guys are. I can't remember where exactly.
They're from Czech.
Okay, from Czech.
Yeah, from Czech. Yeah.
But like you get into not Western Europe, the UK, the like. I mean, it's a more conservative culture, right? And so to your
Very.
point, it's not the American risk taking culture. I mean, like I mean, we pioneered the West, that's the pioneering. There's a reason in a lot of ways that like the hub of tech has been the Bay Area for a very,
Hmm.
very long period of time. So it's like all the people who ended up in California were the descendants of the crazy folks who had like settled the West and stuff, right? And it's that mentality that makes it. Anyways, I think the point is like you got to respect them for going out on a limb in that culture without the the safety net of VCs for
Hmm.
sure. But that's like another path. Another path is like the consulting or services path, right? Which some folks might like poo poo, but if you actually look at the like NPV or expected like outcome of that type of business, like, well, you're not going to probably go build some like $10 billion unicorn, but if you're a competent professional who can go build a services business, you probably can go build a really good business there. So, like, should you just go do
Hmm.
that, right?
That's the route I took.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because I mean, when again, my business partner Matt and I, we had periphery to like a lot of what was happening in the tooling space essentially, because every company wanted to talk to us to see if we'd want to partner with them. We knew what was going on, But then we look at these companies and we're like, we make more money than these companies do, yet they're valued at these crazy valuations. But then, consulting is one of these areas where at best it's linearly scalable.
Yeah, and the margin profile is different, right? So
yeah, it's tough. Like, I personally just got out of it. I'm taking a break from it for a while just because I'm like, I want to do something else, But there's a lot of ways. I mean, I'm starting a new business right now. I'm starting a new business, and it's like the way I'm doing it is, it's self-funded. It does have an opportunity for investors if they want to get in it. It's probably in a year or two but the thing is, you can control your own pace and stuff. But I think what happened was the money, as you point out, it was so free flowing in the good old days, not too long ago, where everybody, I mean, why wouldn't you go get money?
Yeah. People are jamming a $3 million round down your throat. Like, why wouldn't you do that? You can go pay yourself, not probably what you made as the VP of data at your old company, but you can go pay yourself, go start a company, go pay yourself $200,000, like as a founding CEO. Like, cool, right? That like de-risks it quite a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing, I think the services thing is an interesting thing. Like I have that comes with its own set of challenges and grinding and like the bootstrapping phase. But there's like so many different ways to start a business. Like what's actually one of the best ways to start a business that's not sexy at all? Like become a franchisee of like restaurant chains. Like there's some incredibly successful folks that have just been like, we're going to go start franchises of Papa John's or whatever it is, right? And hey, it's not sexy at all, but like, and that's completely different than building a data infrastructure company. But people do it.
One of my friends owns a fund. He invests in restaurants and owns, I don't even know how many franchises of things like Five Guys and a bunch of other restaurants. And he makes a ton of money, more than most tech people I know, like way more.
I mean, it's a completely different model.
Completely different model. This guy and it's a fund. He just hangs out, walking around in his like oversized basketball shorts. You would never know this guy has like, he controls most of the restaurants in the Rockies. You wouldn't know.
I mean, it's incredible.
Doesn't care. Yeah. So, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of ways.
Yeah. Doesn't make that, and that's really hard to do though, right? It's not like, oh, he did this and he just like, it was a cakewalk, right? Like that I'm sure he, grinded for years and years and, the challenges are different. Like the cash conversion cycle is difficult, right? There's all of these things that you don't have, which is what attracts all the venture money and the smartest people in the room to building a software business. You're like, oh, I can just build something that's going to grow 100% year over year with 90% gross margin. Like, let's sign me up for that,
In the case of like Mosaic selling to Databricks, I mean, I don't think that company was around that long at all, and they sold for a lot of money, right? And that's just, I know one friend of mine, she was going to join there and would have been an early employee and would have done really, really well there. But that's the gamble of it. It's kind of like the lottery ticket in that case. It's
totally
like, cool, you won. But
yeah, I mean, it's a total power law, right?
Very much.
I mean, that's what goes back to like the reactions I got from investors when I was like so stressed out about it, telling them I was like shutting down, right? Because it was like, we know that this is going to happen over and over and over again, right? And it's as long as they get into their fund is like, they just need to get into that one thing that's going to return the fund 10x, right? And you get into the Mosaic, you get into a Mosaic and a Looker and DBT, if DBT can, turn their valuation into something lasting, right? And you're good. And every other investment that you make can just fail as like an early stage investor, and it's going to be fine.
I'm curious how these VCs are going to, because I mean, there were a lot of VCs that started, around the COVID era. And I'm very curious to see how they're going to do. They're probably 4 years in it. And if you started in 2020 on a 10-year fund, 5-year fund or whatever, and it's like, I'm very curious what the returns are going to be like. Or if you had invested, or if you're one of the, even a medium-sized, maybe bigger VC that invested in all the data companies or tech companies in general, right? The whole sector sort of just went into a kind of a mudslide. And so I wonder how many VCs are left at the end of the day. Because I can only imagine, startup founders have their trepidations, but it's like the VCs also, you have your times at bat too. And then I can imagine your LPs are sitting there like, cool, do I want to give you more money this time? I don't know.
Yeah.
Why would I?
I mean, I think the dynamics are different, right? Like, you talked about, you can't fail in Europe, right?
Hmm.
Do I know what I'm doing next? Not yet. Like I'm going to spend the summer figuring out my next moves and all of this
That's
stuff,
good.
right? But am I worried about the future of my career? Like this isn't good for me, but like I'll figure it out, right? I'm a very employable person. I was an
Yeah.
executive before. I'll figure it out next. Part of what keeps me, before we got on the recording, you're like, Nick, you don't seem like you're about to jump off the bridge, like a bridge. I mean, a lot of what keeps me honestly grounded is like I have a family, I have kids, right?
Yeah.
That's the stuff that keeps me grounded. Um, and of course, not that my company doesn't matter. And I spent 4 years trying to get it off of the ground. But like ultimately, like if you should know what matters the most, right? Um, but like, so anyways, as a founder, you often, if you want to be a founder again, you often get another shot because people know that you got to make one bet.
Hmm.
As an investor, like you diversify your portfolio. So if you go raise $20 million and, you make 20 bets there or 30 bets, well, if your portfolio, like if that fund is crap, well, like you might not get another shot because you made all of these different investments and you couldn't make it work, right? Um, so yeah, we haven't seen like a bunch of funds going at it. I mean, OpenView like laid off all these folks, like
Yeah.
that Boston fund that was like very well known, had done a ton of like PLG stuff. But like I don't think we've gotten the full story exactly about what's happening there because it seemed like that was
Hmm.
more idiosyncratic to like the GPs and stuff. But there hasn't been like a mass shutdown of lackluster VCs. But maybe to your point, it's just
Yeah.
like they're all out trying to raise from LPs right now, and they're just going to be quietly shutting down here over the next couple of years.
It's hard to say. Yeah. I mean, it's not like either of us have optics into this,
Yeah,
that world there. So
yeah.
it's,
I mean, you've heard some rumblings that like the the non-traditional VCs that like got into the VC game in this like latest
like Tiger.
Tiger. I mean, the Tiger
Yeah.
example is the one where it's like Tiger's not doing all these investments and their tech portfolio is completely underwater because that strategy just hasn't worked. Um, but like Andreessen, as an example, which
Hmm.
has like a massive fund and is an example of like a multi-stage fund that has increasingly gone into like the earliest stages. Um, you hear that their returns are great.
Yeah. Power laws again, though.
Yeah,
Power
power
laws
law.
again. What was it like? 90% of VC funds. I can't remember the research I saw. I saw actually multiple iterations of this, but yeah, 90% of the VC funds can't even beat the S&P. Same as mutual funds, which is kind of surprising because they're different
Yeah.
approaches completely.
I
Not
mean,
even the
hedge
same
funds
thing.
too, right? I mean,
Hedge funds too. That's right. Yeah, Buffett had that bet with Ted Sides, I think it was, for 10 years. Like if the hedge fund industry, however you benchmarked it, could beat the S&P index, and not even.
I mean, you should just be a meme
So
trader. You can beat the S&P that way.
could. Let's do that. That's our next business. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I feel like what happened to you. I mean, because it's not like you're a smart operator, and I think it's one of those things where, at least from where I'm sitting, I see this with a lot of my friends right now, where they're I don't have like a lot of. I don't think I have any dumb friends that have like gone and raised a bunch of money and started a startup. I have a lot of smart friends that have done this,
Yeah.
and a lot of very qualified people, right? I try not to have dumb friends by default, but that's another topic for another day. But
Not a
it's one of
guarantee.
these. Nothing guaranteed. People tend to surprise you at the weirdest times. But it's just like one of those things where I feel like it's just the timing. It's one of those things where you sometimes just get, it is what it is. So, and I hear different iterations of this. Some people say, "Oh, well, everyone should, the playing field's the same for everybody, right? So you shouldn't complain and stuff." But it's also like you only have so much runway to go, right? And until that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
So,
Look, I think of course, there's an element of personal agency in all of this stuff and what your results are,
mhm.
right? you could be the smartest person in the room. And the joke for me, my entire career is like, I went to Harvard twice, right? Like I went to Harvard Business School, I went to Harvard undergrad. So like I walk into any tech company and I'm that guy, right? And
Hmm.
like there's a million jokes that are about it. Um, and of course you have to embrace that because otherwise you look embarrassed, you look like an idiot, you know? Um, so sorry, I'm losing my train of thought by talking about the having been at Harvard twice. Oh, what I was gonna say is that like you can be a very smart person, but like it is hard. I mean, it's hard. There's like going from 0 to 1, very, very like there's a roadmap for it, but every company is very, very different, and it is as much of an art as it is a science. And we were like very, very close to it to like
Hmm.
figuring it out there at the end. So like personal agency and decisions, of course, plays a big part here, but luck plays a really big part too. Of course, I want to believe that, right? But like it does play a really, really big part. Like take the biggest, most successful founders in the world, right? Are they smarter than us? Is Mark Zuckerberg smarter than like most of the founders that are out there? So I was at Harvard undergrad, Harvard again, hello. When Zuck started Facebook, I think I'm Facebook user like 400 because
No
like they
way.
started Facebook at Harvard my freshman year. Yeah. Um, is he the most brilliant entrepreneur ever who, if he went and started something new, that's going to turn to gold? Or was he just lucky? Like, I'm much more impressed with the folks who had a journey like me that got across the like product market fit thing and they just grinded for like another 10 years and figured it out. Like
Hmm.
those are the folks that you probably want to invest in again. Like Mark Zuckerberg, to pick on him, like he got lucky to some extent, he got lucky and then he just had infinite resources for like a really, really long period of time. And I think if you look at so many of these breakaway companies, like luck did play such a major part in that.
Hmm.
And so it's both, right? What proportion is more, like is greater, like personal agency versus luck? I don't know. But you need
Yeah,
a little
it's a
bit
good
of
question.
both. Me
Yeah.
and my co-founder, we kept being like, we've got no luck. We've got no luck. We've got no luck. Like we need some luck to break our way. And was like finally there at the end, we're like, oh, we finally feel like we've gotten luck breaking our way, right? Like, is this give me enough luck? And it just wasn't. It was luck, but it just wasn't. If we would have been luckier if we'd come upon that last thing that was working 6 months earlier or 9 months earlier, because
Hmm.
that would have been I think that would have been the difference, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting because you can run through the counterfactuals in your head a lot and kind of scenario play, and I'm sure you are too. Like, what if 6 months we did this, and
Oh yeah, that's
but
like the
what
worst, you know?
oh, it is. I've done this before. I mean, not even with my other businesses. I mean, long ago I had businesses. I wrote about this in my newsletter. And go and try something, and it was too early for me. And I failed. And had to go back. But I always thought of it as tuition, right? I mean, that's these are just the lumps you're gonna have to take and the price you're gonna have to pay. And um, if you just I think if you just persevere at stuff, at some point something will break. Enough times at bat. You just got to keep going at it. That's sort of the key. I think a lot of people, it's easy to beat the shit out of yourself. And you're probably gonna go through times like that too. You probably are, and and you're gonna play through all the different scenarios and all the things that could have been, and there's gonna be days you hate yourself. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but the thing is, I think I mean, it's just you never know what's next. You never know what this is going to lead into. All the learnings you got from this. So
Totally. Yeah, I mean, for
you
me,
know,
like, and I've spent a lot of time already meditating on it. Like, in many ways, as a startup founder, unless you get that luck, you're staring failure in the face at some point in
hmm
time, right? One of the things I always say is like a startup is a half step from glory and a half step from failure. every moment, every
Every
day,
moment.
right? And for me, especially now where like shutdown is here, right? Well, do I call it a failure, right? Is it a failure? Because words matter, the way you position things matter, right? As much to you as anything. Quite frankly,
Hmm.
like I talked to my therapist about this, and if I say like we failed, she'd be like, "Don't say that," right?
Yeah.
And what's the narrative, right? Or like, what's the story? Is like, well, would you have done it? Like, would you do it again? Was the time worth it? Did you learn out of it, right? Did you become better? Are you better at your job? Are you a better person? People say like, I have a friend who's a very successful like founder, and when I like started the company, and I was hesitant about it, he's like, you can't win if you don't get on the field.
Yep.
Um, and if you win, that's great, but it's ultimately about the journey. And like one of the things I thought when he said that to me 4 years ago was that like it being about the journey means that like you create great memories, right? Like ultimately what matters is you have the memories of that journey. It's not about the money, right? It's not about the outcome. But I think to me, what that means is that like it's about the journey because the journey makes you better, right? The journey is worth taking because it's a journey of it should be a journey of growth. The journey changes you. The journey can change you for the better or for it could change you for the worse, right? It changes a lot of people for the worse. But for me, I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna let this change me for the worse. I'm gonna like have it change me for the better. So like, am I satisfied with the result? No fucking way.
Right.
But was the journey worth taking? I believe it was, right? So where do I go next becomes the question. But that's at least the way I try to frame it for myself and think about it, and why when you hear me talk, I don't sound like I'm about to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge. As much
Yeah.
as it all sucks,
For sure. And you got kids too, man. I mean, and the cool thing with kids is they don't care about any of this stuff. They're not like, dad sucks because his startup failed.
Oh
Right? Your
yeah,
kids love you no matter what. And that's like,
yeah. I told my oldest kid like just because he knows I'm a founder, right? I'm like, hey, I had to shut the company down. He's like 7. I'm about to turn 7. If I told him he was 7, he'd be like, I'm not 7 yet, Daddy. I'm about to turn 7. I told him, and he's like, okay, can we go throw the baseball, please?
exactly.
Great, let's go do that.
Exactly, man. That's what matters at the end of the day. It's like, you're doing it. You're a parent. You're doing all this stuff for them at the end of the day. I mean, all the success in business, at least my opinion, is you're doing it for your own ego. At the end of the day, it's like, yeah, money's great. You're gonna get that. You can make money in a lot of places,
Totally,
but ultimately, it's like, the quality of your life you're gonna have with your kids and your family is like, those are the kind of memories that you can't take back.
for
Like today,
sure.
I was gonna go work and I was like, gosh, but my kid, he was getting awarded at school at his middle school for like being student of the year and stuff like that, right? And my other
Amazing.
kid had literally across the schoolyard had an assembly, the talent show there, so like running back and forth, and got home at like 10:30 a.m. or something like that. I wouldn't miss that for the world, no matter what, and that's like, they're not sitting there judging you like, are you hustling today? They'll never ask you that.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
so it's just
yeah. Like
that's the
this,
stuff that matters.
totally. Like, and that's just so right. Like this morning, as an example, my our help like had a doctor's appointment. So she has a doctor's appointment.
Yeah.
My wife works, I work. So normally, we have 3 kids. Our youngest is not like in school yet. So like someone has to cover that, right?
It's a hard phase,
It's a
man.
hard phase. And normally we'd be like, oh, what do we do? Or it's like Nick's running his company and my wife has a very like intense job. But today I was like, no, I got it. Like it's no big deal, right? And there was something beautiful about that, right? Not that that is going to be me forever, right? But like I live in New York. I dropped my other kid
Hmm.
off at nursery school. I took her to the Central Park Zoo and we spent 4 hours
That's so
together
cool.
hanging out. It was beautiful, right? And so like I never got parental leave. Like 2 of my kids were born when I started the company. I took like 3 days off, like my first child was born. I took 2 weeks off. I've never had a real parental leave the way you would if you worked at Facebook. Um, So there's something beautiful about that, and I think to your point, like your kids don't care if you hustle. Like, will your kids maybe eventually notice if you're like have a lot of money or not? Okay, fine, yeah, sure they will. But like, what matters the most? Like, are you a good person? Are you a good
Mm-hmm.
father? Right? So like, if you're gonna go take the journey of like starting something, like, what would you rather have? Be a shitty dad and go make $100 million, or would I rather become a better dad and fail? I'll pick the latter every day of the week.
Fuck yeah, man. Well, thanks for the chat.
Thank you, man. Thank
Like
you
I
for
said,
having me.
wasn't the one I was expecting, but yes, it's yeah. Well, we'll have to keep in touch, man. I'm curious to see what your next move is. So I think I really think you're on. I really think you're on to bigger, better things out of this, man. It's gonna take a bit to, but you know, something about you. I think you just you have something else. And maybe this wasn't it, but yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate
So
it. We'll figure it out.
yeah,
I mean,
you figured it out, man.
just trying to take this moment for what it is,
Yeah,
and we'll move on from it, and we'll go from there. But thanks for having me on the show, and
yeah. Anytime.
yeah, um,
Yeah,
yeah, let's definitely keep in touch. And
cool.
yeah, if anyone's listening that is looking for awesome people, please email me because I'm definitely trying to place some of our team members, and we have some great talent. So
Awesome.
hit me up.
Nick at Workstream.
Nick at
IO.
workstream.io.
Perfect. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Joe.
All right,
Great to
take care.
chat today.
All right, thanks.